I am so excited about this next event. Hi, Anastasia.
Oh, hello. So am I.
Welcome.
Um, and I'd like to say hello and welcome to the second day of the 2021 San Diego Writers Festival to anyone who's just joining us on Facebook for this event.
Awesome.
I'm Anastasia Zada-Kipkins, Director of Operations, and I'm here with Jennifer and Marni, the festival co-founders. We're so glad that you could join us here today for this event. It's a conversation about the craft of writing with our own Marni Freedman and author Tayari Jones. I'm going to just quickly invite Marni. I'm going to introduce Marni. Marni's already here with us. Sorry. Marni Freedman is a screenwriter, playwright, award-winning author, writing coach, co-founder, and director of programming for San Diego Writers Festival. Her play, Two Goldsteins on Acid, was made into the film Playing Mona Lisa. Marni's one-man show, A Jewish Joke, was produced off-Broadway in 2018. She's also the editor of Shaking the Tree, short, brazen memoir. Marni has 2 award-winning books, 7 Essential Writing Tools and Permission to Roar for the female thought leaders ready to write their book. You can find Marni at marnifreedman.com, a writing hub to help writers find their authentic voice.
And I just want to say I've read both of those books. They're fantastic. They do give you permission to roar. So go out and get them. And now it is my honor to thank our keynote sponsors, Marlena Fiel and Ed O'Connor, authors of Called. And here's a sneak peek at this forthcoming historical novel. We're going to watch the book trailer, and then I'll tell you a little more about it. Assuming we can get it up. Video, here it comes. Some had a story, they had a mission. I've read this wonderful book, folks. It's about 3 lives inextricably intertwined. A handsome physician obsessed with caring for the underserved, a shy and devout Mennonite nurse, and the other woman, a brilliant green-eyed attorney and activist. Set against the backdrop of World War II, Nazi uprisings, political unrest in Argentina and Paraguay, and the scourge of leprosy left untreated, Dr. John and Clara Schmidt vow to live a life of service, but at what cost? Based on true events that span 6 decades, Called is an epic tale of adventure and love that celebrates the triumph of the human spirit. You're muted, Anastasia.
And now it is our pleasure to introduce Marlena, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. Globally recognized authors, scholars, and speakers, Marlena and Ed are spiritual seekers whose writing explores the depths of who we are and what's possible in our lives. They have devoted themselves to supporting others and identifying and removing the barriers to realizing their dreams. They consider every blog, essay, book, or workshop an opportunity to share their insights with others, as well as learn more about their own transformational journey. Don't miss this romantic adventure. You can pre-order your copy now at calledanovel.com. Now we'd like to welcome.
Hello, Marlena and Ed. Welcome.
Hey there.
It's good to be here.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for your sponsorship. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you. We want to give you a couple minutes to talk about why you wanted to or agreed to be a sponsor. And you're going to then introduce Tayari.
Perfect. Well, we agreed to be a sponsor, first of all, because we love San Diego Writers Festival and we love what you're doing. And after reading Tayari Jones's book, we are just so honored to be here and to be the official sponsors.
Well, we really thank you.
Go
ahead, Ed.
Our relationship with you, Jennifer, has a little bit to do with it. Thank you for the great advice, wonderful website you created for us, etc.
It's my pleasure. All right. Well, we just can't thank you enough. We're so glad that you get to be here in person. This is a wonderful book. Tayari is amazing. I'm excited about this conversation with Marni. So do you mind introducing our keynote speaker, Marlena?
Ed and I are so honored to introduce Tayari Jones. She's such a provocative storyteller who entertains, but also offers us all a serious social commentary. Dubbed by the Los Angeles Times a bard of the modern South, Tayari Jones confronts issues of race, family, and criminal justice reform in her novels. Her latest, the instant New York Times bestseller, An American Marriage, is an Oprah's book club selection, and she appeared on Barack Obama's summer reading list, as well as his year-end roundup. The novel was awarded the Women's Prize for Fiction, formerly known as the Orange Prize, Aspen Words Prize, and NAACP Image Award. Jones, a member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers, has also been a recipient of the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, United States Artist Fellowship, Guggenheim Fellowship, NEA Fellowship, and Radcliffe Institute Bunting Fellowship. I personally find it interesting that the title of An American Marriage in Germany is In guten wie in schlechten Tagen, which means in good days and in bad, identifying marriage as the focus of the book. For us here in the US, the emphasis is on the uniquely tragic American story about relationships ripped apart by wrongful incarceration. If you haven't already, be sure to read it. You will be touched. Tayari's third novel, Silver Sparrow, was added to the NEA Big Read Library of Classics in 2016. Jones is currently working on her newest novel, Old Fourth Ward, which follows a woman returning to her hometown following a tragedy and explores themes of family, change, and identity. She's a professor of creative writing at Emory University. Tayari, welcome to the San Diego Writers Festival.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Marlena and Ed. We really appreciate your generous support. And hello, Tayari. Thank you. We're so happy you're here. We're going to turn it over to you and Marni.
What an honor it is to meet you, Tayari. We're so excited to have you. We've been waiting for this for more than a year, so I'm actually a little in shock that it's happening.
I'm just so happy that we figured out how to make it work.
Yes. I'm going to say just a little bit about the book first. If you haven't read An American Marriage, you're in for a treat, and I'm going to give you a few of the basics. Newlyweds Celestial and Roy are the embodiment of both the American dream and the New South. He's a young executive, and she is the artist on the brink of an exciting career. But as they settle into the routine of their life together, they're ripped apart by circumstances neither could have imagined. Roy is arrested and sentenced to 12 years for a crime Celestial knows he did not commit. Though fiercely independent, Celestial finds herself bereft and unmoored, taking comfort in Andre, her childhood friend, the best man at their wedding. As Roy's time in prison passes, she is unable to hold on to the love that had been her center. After 5 years, Roy's conviction is suddenly overturned and he returns to Atlanta, ready to resume their life together. This stirring love story is profoundly insightful look into the hearts and minds of three people who are at once bound and separated by forces beyond their control. An American Marriage is a masterpiece of storytelling, an intimate and deep look at the souls of people who must reckon with the past while moving forward. It's a gorgeous book, Tayari.
Well, thank you.
And I know that you are a big fan of Toni Morrison. And I watched, as you spoke about, saying there was kind of like a time before Toni Morrison and after Toni Morrison. And for me, there is sort of a time before I read American Marriage and the time after, because I used to be a therapist for youth at risk. And this concept of I watched it in real life. I watched it happening to the kids that I was working with, being pulled into the system and not being able to do anything about it. There was so much that I kind of stuffed down during that time period that I wanted to say, that I felt like you said in this book, and also about separation. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, I'm really happy that it connected with you, even more so since you have personal experiences, because that's one of the fears, well, not fears, but concerns you have as a writer. You want the people who know what you're talking about to recognize the experience.
Yeah. And I know this is a discussion on craft, but I just couldn't start without saying thank you, because someone else who wondered about the topic, I was able to say, hey, here, read the book. Rather than trying to give some sort of lecture or discussion or statistics, it was a much more powerful way of saying, you'll learn about it from this.
Well, I think that is the place where fiction can go in a way that some other types of like reporting or sociology, fiction has a way of embracing the reader in a really different kind of way. People sometimes ask me, why did you go fiction with this? Why didn't you take a real case and talk about that? But I think that the magic of the art of fiction has a different type of appeal.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Okay, now the structure questions, because I have so many, and we also have a ton that have come in from Facebook. So one thing that I just am in amazement about is the structure of the book. I felt like it was exquisite. And I wondered about your first draft. Was your first draft like that? Did you always know that you were going to play with time in the way that you did, revealing backstory, a little bit at a time? Or did you write their storylines out and then move them around?
Well, here's the thing. When I write a novel, I am not sure what this novel is going to look like. I don't know how this novel is going to end. So I can't make kind of structural decisions until I am well into the project. So the first thing I did was I actually wrote the novel from beginning to end, thinking it was going to be a novel only from the point of view of Celestial, the woman whose husband has been wrongfully imprisoned. And I wrote her story, and I got so much pushback from my early readers. Everyone was saying, well, what about her husband? What's happening to her husband? And then I got defensive because I have a number of friends who are writers who are men, and no one has ever asked a man to rewrite a book from the point of view of the wife. Has never happened, will never happen. So I just refused. But then one thing about being a novelist, as opposed to, say, being a painter, if a painter has a painting and she chooses to alter it, listening to criticism, she can never have her original back. Mm-hmm. But as a writer, you can make any changes you want. You still have your original draft. So the only thing keeping you from taking someone's suggestion is your pride. And pride is never good with art. So I started just noodling around, writing Roy's point of view. And before I knew it, I had written the entire book over from his point of view. It was very fast. It was very easy. And the fact that it was very easy made me very suspicious, because
Why?
a story,
suspicious?
Because a story should challenge you. If it's too easy, you're not being challenged. Mm-hmm. And the reason Roy's story didn't really challenge me is that it was a story I had heard, all my life. One man against the system. He just wants to come home and find a faithful woman. That's a story as old as the Odyssey. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I was really struggling with in writing this novel was what I call the tyranny of genre expectations. Mm. When I say to you, I've written a novel and it's about a woman whose husband has been wrongfully imprisoned, people are expecting one woman's brave fight to free her man.
Right.
And every time I wrote something that wasn't that, I just got all this pushback. And Roy, it's like, absolutely, that's the book Roy is trying to read. Roy is like, I would love to see one woman bravely fight to free me, her man. So I had to fight that expectation. And even the fact that it was such an easily paved ground in my own mind. So I took their two voices, since I had them, and I alternated them. And I felt good about that. I felt like that was something new. Right? Like in the Odyssey, we don't know what Penelope thinks. Mm-hmm. And I think we have very few honest representations of women's feelings in this type of situation. We have kind of idealized ones like, oh, I just want my man and I just want to have babies and this is all I want to do. And she's different. But Roy felt very contained because I felt like he was feeling symbolic, like he was the Black man. So every time he did something, I felt like there was a voice saying, so what are you trying to say about the Black man? And there is no such creature. So since Roy was feeling like that, he wasn't feeling like a real person. So when I added Andre's voice, just having two Black men in the story, it made it where neither one of them had to be so representational. They could be more idiosyncratic.
Can you say more about bringing Andre into it? I know I've had some lively discussions with people who have some very strong feelings about Andre. What was it like for you to add in his voice?
It wasn't hard for me. I don't have these. I know some people have really strong feelings about Andre, because Andre also is the one who completely undermines the patriarchal expectations of the book, right? And it's really disturbing to people because Celestial is seen as property. And it's like Andre is a usurper of Roy's property. Andre says you can't steal her like you steal an idea or a wallet. She's a person with choices. And this makes him a disruptive force, but it didn't make him hard to write. I get it. I don't feel really rattled by any of them. I feel like I understand all of them. Mm-hmm. So having them in the story it felt like they lived in the story. So why wouldn't they have a voice?
One of the things that I've heard you talk about before is once you hear that everyone's point of view and you really buy into it and you feel everyone's point of view as right, even if they're on opposing sides, that's when you know that you have a novel. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on that.
Well, for me, novels dwell in a place of moral ambiguity. And so if there's someone whose point of view I can't see, then I'm not going to have ambiguity because I'll think they're stupid or dumb. And they'll also make a soft, like a gooey place in the story, almost like if you're baking something, you take it out of the oven, it's got that gooey spot. So they all have to be their points of view have to be equally valid so that the story is taught. It's almost like when you're pulling something, it has to be pulled from all sides or else it'll droop. And so Roy's point of view is, I was wrongfully imprisoned. I have suffered more than everyone in this story, and everyone in this story needs to work to help me get right. It's the least you can do. You all are so privileged. Anyone who's not in prison is privileged to Roy, and he has a point. But Celestial feels like Roy says, I'm innocent. Celestial says, I'm innocent too. She's also innocent. It's the fact that Roy has been deprived of her life, meaning that she should be deprived of hers. That is a legitimate point. Andre feels like, I am the boy next door. I have loved her all my life. And I've loved her since before Roy even laid eyes on her. And she's a grown woman and she can make choices. He also has a point. And you can see the case against them all also. Like the arguments that they have with each other, they are also legitimate. And that's what makes a story a page turner, because the author is not telling you what to think or which way to go.
So how did the characters come to you? I know you've talked before about this conversation that you overheard. I wondered if you'd share that again, because I think it's such an interesting way that you got the spark for the novel.
It's really interesting. I was in the mall because I was stranded on the novel. I had been doing a lot of research, but a story is about people and and their problems, not problems and their people. And I had a problem. I didn't have the right people. And I overheard a couple arguing in the mall. They were in love and in trouble. And the woman said to the man, she said, Roy, you wouldn't have waited on me for 7 years. And I looked at her, I looked at him, they looked at me, and we were all three in agreement that he would not have waited on her for 7 years. We all knew this, but he turned to her and said, I don't know what you're talking about. This wouldn't have happened to you in the first place. And again, he was also right. And I got this idea about a couple separated by a wrongful conviction. But here's the thing. I don't even know that these people were talking about prison. He could have been in the Peace Corps. Who knows? We don't know. So I think it's that I was looking for something. I was looking for a story. And then that overhearing that story then kind of motivated me because I was looking for a story. I think if I wasn't looking for a story, I wouldn't have even paid any attention to them.
People are so excited about you, so excited about this book. There's a lot of questions coming in, but I just have a couple as like a a writing teacher nerd. One of them is about metaphors and simile, because I found myself just surprised and wow, when someone helps you to think about something in a way you've never done, it's very powerful. And I really love, like, for example, the one, marriage is like grafting a limb onto a tree trunk. You have the limb freshly sliced, dripping sap, and smelling of springtime. And then you have the mother tree stripped of her protective bark, gouged and ready to receive this new addition. I just put the book down. I was like, oh, can you talk to me about how these metaphors came to you?
Unfortunately, I can't really say how they come to me. I think that when I'm working on a novel, I'm fully engrossed in it and I see metaphors everywhere because a novel is always on my mind. But also, if you think about it, all of us, everyday people, speak in metaphor. It's just that when we try to start using metaphor, that the metaphors elude us because we don't think of it as a natural way of talking and thinking, but people do it all the time. Mm-hmm. And then once I have like a little piece of one, like I was looking at, because we have this thing we do here a lot in Atlanta with our dogwood trees. We have pink dogwoods and white dogwoods. And sometimes people who are kind of extra, they do graft the pink limbs onto the white tree. So they'll have a two-tone tree. And I did see one and it made me think about the book. But I think that the key to metaphor is just to be really observant of what's around you and to think, what else am I looking at when I'm looking at something? Like I'm looking at this tree, but what else am I looking for or looking at? And then the metaphors, they will just come to you. It'll become second nature in your writing once you become aware that it is your first nature in your thinking.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to look at it. I'd like to talk about the concept of suspense and tension. We think maybe it's only in a mystery or a thriller where we're doing this. There was so much tension in this book. It really is a page turner. And I wondered, as a lot of our audience are writers and they're wondering how they can also make something page turning. I was wondering, did some of that page turning stuff happen just naturally? You knew where to leave off? Or was it more in the editing process where you're like, okay, here's where I'm going to leave them so they want to come back?
Well, some stories are just more page turnery than others, right? Like a man who's wrongfully imprisoned comes home wanting to be with his wife who's with someone else. Well, that's just page turnery. Like
you kept us waiting in the most clever of ways that was craft.
Well, I think that yes, I do think that I did think there were some ways, like also, I'm such a nerd. I love the Romeo and Juliet-ness of it, of Andre going to Elo.
Oh, that was the best.
And Roy is going this way, like Rome, they can't, but what's hard these days about creating so much of tension and suspense comes from people not being able to be in touch with each other.
Yeah.
Like if you think about Romeo and Juliet, if she had been able to text him and said, not really dead, LOL, I'll explain later, the whole story wouldn't happen. It's very hard to get people away from their devices enough for some suspense to happen. Because if you write something and someone is like, I left my phone at home, first off, no one leaves their phone at home on a cross-country trip. And if they left their phone at home, it's a plot device. Mm-hmm. Because you're trying to get them where they can't talk, or you say, oh, we don't have any cell signal. The reader will know that you're trying to make it where something can happen. So what I did was, for example, I had Big Roy say to Andre, don't call her, give my son a chance. So it wasn't that he couldn't talk to her, it's that he agreed not to. And it still created that same thing of no one calling anyone and giving a heads up. But I was able to, since Big Roy asked Andre not to do it, then it becomes developing character, not just suspense builder.
Well, now you brought up my favorite character, which is Big Roy. I don't know if it's everyone else's favorite character.
It is.
Is it really? Okay. I had a stepmother that didn't like me very much. I don't know if it was because it was touching on this man who was not his natural born child, but just had the fiercest of love for him. I wrote down some of the things that he said. Did you know when you were writing that was a tearjerker moment?
When I wrote Big Roy at his wife's funeral?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Big Roy anywhere. For me, the time that I personally cried, it was when reading that he said to his wife, how do you know I don't just want to be with the kid? There's more leading up to it, but it was that moment of like, here's this guy that's this generosity of his heart is for the kid too.
Yeah, Big Roy, I loved writing Big Roy, but also, those kind of characters, they can only take up so much space in your book because they don't have moral ambiguity. Big Roy is like, I'm just over here. He's like a voice of goodness. He's like a bright light in the book. And so he's in there. He doesn't have that many scenes. You can only, like I said, you can only spend so much time with those kind of people in a book. They serve as really interesting counterpoints to the other characters. That is something where you have to restrain yourself in the writing, because when you have a character like Big Roy, he's so charming, he's so funny, he's so awesome. Just like in real life, you want to spend time with the awesome person, but you can only spend so much time with him.
How did you, we've talked a lot today, and we're going to continue to talk more about plotting and pantsers. And you were saying earlier that when you start, you don't really know where you're going. Can you talk a little bit more about your writing process, and what do you know when you start? And is there ever a time when you come in and say, okay, I'll look at an outline, or just not outlining at all? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't outline. I don't enjoy it. I just don't enjoy it. I imagine if I were to outline, for me, if I were to plot the whole story out before I write it, I wouldn't have any motivation to write it, because the story would be spoiled for me, much in the way it would be spoiled for a reader if the reader was to know what was going to happen. And I also feel that when I have tried to plot things out, you can see me aiming for that next plot point. And when you feel me aiming for it, you can see it coming too. So that's just not how I do. I just get in there and just kind of go into, like, not a fugue state, but
oh yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I just type along and see what happens. And sometimes something good happens. Sometimes something stupid happens. If something stupid happens, I back up and try again. So I don't just go with whatever the spirit sends me, but I'm always looking for an unexpected delivery from the spirit.
And how did you feel about the ending? Did it take you a long time to come up with that ending, or was it just right there?
No, I got stranded 50 pages from the end for about a year, because I realized that I was asking myself the wrong question, because I was allowing Roy, the character, to lead me through the book. Roy is under the impression that the moral measure of this universe is what people can do to help him, because he suffered so much. And also, he is a person who has received an awful lot of love and care in his community. In the larger part of society, he is viewed as, he's presumed criminal, but in his own community, in the Black community, everyone sees him as the future. He's a young Black man. He is the future, and everyone assists him because they believe that he is, in fact, the future. So he goes to every person and says, please, how can you help me? His mother is helping him from the grave. Like, everyone he knows is assisting him. Davina is like, I think you need some restorative sex. Would you like some? He's like, oh, why, yes, I would. But when he comes to Celestial, this is a problem, because she doesn't respond in the way that he would like. And so he thinks that is the conflict here. But what I, the writer, realized, because the writer and the character, we're not the same person. So I had to say to Roy, he said, what? I said, I think that we're asking the wrong question here. And Roy responded to me kind of like, but I was wrongfully imprisoned. I'm like, I know you were a pumpkin. I know, and it's terrible. But if you're going to move forward in your life, you have to learn how to think about other people. You can't be in a marriage where you never consider the other person's feelings. And he said, but I said, I know, but you are not going to be a husband to anyone if you keep thinking of yourself as a symbolic creature, as a person who has been wrongfully incarcerated. You aren't thinking about her as a person. And once you realize that she is a person, and Andre is a person, and everyone is a person, like, you're not the only one that's a person, then you can become a citizen of your own life. And when you're a citizen of your own life, you can move forward into the future. So realizing that, I was able to write the ending, but I was stuck there for a year, and it was really terrible.
What's your advice to someone who gets that kind of stuck? And I've been there before, where you feel like, oh, there's not an answer. Did you always know the answer would come, or how did you make your way through that, navigate that?
Nope, I didn't know the answer would come. I thought the answer wouldn't come. I thought I was going to have to repay the publisher their very modest advance, but I had still spent it. And I just I wasn't going to write a book that didn't answer the question that I wanted to answer. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can always, if you're a smart person, you can find an ending, and you can actually find an ending that would satisfy, but it may not satisfy the question of your own heart. Like, you have to, because I mean, once you know a little bit of something, we've all read a couple hundred books in our lives. So we know what could be a plausible ending, right? I could have had a plausible ending where Celestial and Roy get together, or Roy rejects Celestial because he's mad that she hasn't been faithful. All kinds of things could have happened, but that wasn't the ending. I knew the endings I came up with, they weren't the ending.
How did you know that this one was? Like, this feels like it's answering that question of the heart.
Because it was something I hadn't thought of before.
Can you say more about that?
I hadn't thought about the idea that it had not occurred to me that Roy had never asked Celestial how she feels or what she wants. And when he's trying to woo her back, he never says, this is what I can offer you. All he says is, this is how I've suffered. And I had not considered that. And most readers haven't. Most readers, until I pointed out, they're like, you're right. Because his point of view is so strong that they want what he wants. And they aren't able to critique him because he suffered so much. But when I point that out, he never says, come back to me. This is what our life will be together. Come back to me. This is what I will do. And when they realize that, they're like, oh, yeah. And that was how I was when I thought of it. I was like, that's true, Roy. Other people have feelings.
Really, I can hear how you went into dialogue with your characters. Are they still around you today?
Nope.
They're gone.
I mean, that's how people often say to me, people often ask me, oh, will there be a sequel? And there can't be, because the characters aren't with me, and they aren't with me because they're fine now. Novels are about people who are not fine. Novels about people solving their problems. I don't think anyone would be interested in another book about Celestial and Andre doing their thing, chilling, making breakfast, Roy and Davina, working in a barbershop. They don't have a story anymore. They have a story, but their story as it is now matters only to them because they are not in crisis.
How are you feeling about spoilers? We're not doing spoilers, right?
I mean, this book has been out a long time.
I know.
In my opinion, also, there's only one spoiler in this book. There's only one.
I'm going to pop in, Marni. Sorry,
Yes.
voice from the sky.
Yeah.
I say, let's tell our readers right now, there's going to be some spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, plug your ears for a little bit. And then Marni will raise your hand when you're ready to come back in. How's that sound?
When I stop the spoiling,
When the spoiling is stopped.
I have mixed feelings about spoiling too, but I am.
We got to talk about the story.
Well, I'm curious.
It's been 3 years.
Okay, let's do it. So, you're saying there's only one spoiler. I can think of a few. What, in your mind, what was the one spoiler?
I think the one spoiler is what happens between Roy and his cellmate.
Okay.
That's the one spoiler. All the rest, that's the only one that is truly a shock. I mean, as far as Roy and Celestial, I mean, the man is given, they've been married 18 months and he's given a 12-year sentence. I don't think it's shocking that they had all manner of relationship problems.
So do you want to say who he was? See, I still feel bad. I feel bad doing it.
I never spoil that one.
It's such a good.
The reason I don't, because it to me was the only shock for me in writing the book. It was the only thing that shocked me. Things surprised me or, oh, I didn't see that coming. But that one really shocked me. I was like, I felt like Roy was shocked. I was shocked. Everybody was shocked except for Walter, who knew all the time. Now here's a craft thing. Okay, whenever you have a kind of a outrageous plot twist in a story, it costs you I imagine that when you write a novel, you have a budget. And with this budget, right, you have to buy your characters, you have to buy the different settings, you have all these things you have to buy. And plot twists are very expensive. Mm-hmm. And when I first conceived of that, when I first wrote that, it was even more expensive than it is because I had this twist as a surprise to both characters. That's even more expensive. 2 people being shocked, very expensive. So I made it down to 1 just to kind of take the edge off the of it. And also extremely shocking plot twists also, I think, kind of undermine the literary quality also. So instead, it's not a coincidence. It's just a surprise. And I had to do that.
And it works. I mean, I think, there's a chance it might not have, but the way you put it together, it has a very satisfying, oh my gosh,
Yeah, and also when you write a novel, you are allowed some things that seem novelty, right? Like that's the whole thing about a book. Some things get to happen. I enjoyed it. I had an early reader who really was against it, but she was kind of a humorless person also. And humorless people, they don't like stuff like that. But I also like a little fun in a book.
Oh yeah, your humor was all over it. You felt that. Will you do a reading for us? I don't know if you have something ready to read, or if I'm making.
I can.
I would love it. I would love it.
But it's not a funny part.
It doesn't have to be funny.
Okay. I will just do a brief little reading from on the day that Roy is convicted. Okay. It turns out that I watched too much television. I was expecting a scientist to come and testify about DNA. I was looking for a pair of good-looking detectives to burst into the courtroom at the last minute, whispering something urgent to the prosecutor. Everyone would see that this was a big mistake, a major misunderstanding. We would all be shaken but appeased. I fully believed that I would leave the courtroom with my husband beside me. Secure in our home, we would tell people how no Black man is really safe in America. But 12 years is what they gave him. We would be 43 when he was released. Roy understood that 12 years was an eternity because he sobbed right there at the defendant's table. His knees gave way and he fell into his chair. The judge paused and demanded that Roy bear this news on his feet. He stood again and cried, not like a baby, but in a way that only a grown man can cry, from the bottom of his feet up through his torso and finally through his lips. When a man wails like that, it's all the tears that he was never allowed to shed, from Little League disappointment to teenage heartbreak, all the way up to whatever injured his spirit just last year. As Roy howled, my fingers kept worrying a rough patch of skin beneath my chin, a souvenir of scar tissue. When they did what I remember as kicking in the door, what everyone else remembers as opening it with the key, after the door was open, however it was open, we were both pulled from the bed. They dragged Roy into the parking lot and I followed, lunging for him, wearing nothing but a white slip. Someone pushed me to the ground and my chin hit the pavement. My slip rolled up, showing everything to everyone, and my tooth sank into the soft skin of my bottom lip. Roy was on the asphalt beside me, barely beyond my grasp, speaking words that didn't reach my ears. I don't know how long we lay there, parallel like burial plots. Husband, wife, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder.
Yeah, that's a really powerful moment. And you just feel the grit that she's going through, this gritty moment. I wanted to ask you a question about after this, he gets sentenced, and how long you wanted to stay in the prison experience. I had a couple people say to me, I'm afraid to read about that. And I was like, there's not that much of that in there. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about how much you wanted to show of the prison experience.
The prison experience to me was the least interesting thing of the book. That's why, he's out of prison in about 80 pages. I cover about 5 years in about 80 pages, because prison is two things. Prison is monotony and prison is brutality. And when you read a book, you experience vicariously what the characters experience. And I didn't want to experience brutality. And goodness knows in a novel, you don't want to try to recreate monotony. So from a craft perspective, because I passed the time that he's in prison through their letters, we only know of his prison experience what he wants Celestial to know. And because of that, he protects her, he protects us.
Can you talk a little bit about the letter writing? I know that you're a letter writer, and we're at the Memoir Writers Association, we started this letter writing program. actual letters with actual stamps. And there's something very intimate about that. And the things that you'll write in a letter that maybe you wouldn't in an email. I wanted to hear a little bit more about your thoughts of the use of the letters.
Well, like you said, I do write letters, and I've always wanted to write an epistolary novel, but it's very difficult to have an epistolary novel set in the present day because people don't write letters. So then it'll be really contrived, but people in prison write and receive letters. So the prison setting was perfect to use that technique. And letters have an intimacy to them, and they also have a certain kind of performance to them. In that emails you don't edit, for example. But letters you edit, and you're in your writing voice. Like emails kind of mimic your speaking voice. That's why you have all the emoticons and all these things to convey a spoken experience. But with letters, it makes everyone a little more formal and a little more old fashioned. Like there's this, but also like Roy and Celestial, like when he is apologizing for his terrible behavior, when she has the art exhibit and doesn't mention him, and he's mad and he's conveying the advice his cellmate gave him, he kind of takes on almost an academic stance. And that's kind of funny too. It gave each of them a little bit of room to be artists in their communication.
And that one exchange where what does he say? I'm innocent. And then she writes back, I'm innocent too. That was really powerful. Where do you think people go wrong? This is a question from one of my students when they want to use letter writing in their writing.
I mean, I don't know. I think that one of the things you just have to remember is your letters in your book are probably going to be a little shorter than letters people really write. That's the main thing. In real life, people ramble a lot in letters. And for the sake of creating an epistolary novel, the people need to get to the point. So you kind of need to think about what is the point of this one letter?
So this is a question about your writer's voice. It's kind of an elusive concept sometimes. Someone's wondering about, was there a moment when you felt like, yes, this really feels like me. This really feels like my voice. I've broken out of trying to sound like anyone else. This is my voice.
I've always had a pretty strong sense of my voice ever since I was a child writing. And I think that it's because I go back and forth about this a lot, about how I feel about the fact that no one thought I could be a writer, including me. But I now think that may have been the greatest gift of my life, that I was able to write without, I didn't feel any pressure because I did not think anyone would ever care. So I always wrote in what I think is my authentic voice.
Oh, wow. Wait, go back. Say that again. You always wrote what you thought because you didn't think anyone would care.
Yeah, I didn't feel any pressure. I didn't feel like, what are people going to think when they read this? People who? People what? Like, who's going to read this? So it was something that I did for myself. I mean, sometimes I look back on it and I feel a little kind of angry about not being encouraged. Like I feel a little hurt that I wrote all my life and no one noticed it. And I feel a little hurt by that, because I think we all have I always had the fantasy of being the person. You ever meet these people and they have these kids and the child does the slightest thing and they think they should send out a press release?
No, I don't know them at all. I have no relationship to.
But I always had the fantasy of being that person. But I think that I would not be the writer I am if anyone had ever sent a press release, if I ever felt that anyone cared. I mean, so it was just something I did with my own authentic self. As a matter of fact, when I start a new book, the challenge I'm having now with writing another novel is now I know that everyone's looking for my book. And I'm thinking about people. I'm thinking about what people are thinking. And I never have done that before.
Do you think about your audience? Like, do you think about like, you're going to reach this white chick in San Diego, this Jewy girl? Like, do you think of, the grandness of you, or you're just like, I'm telling the story?
I never really thought that. I mean, one of the gifts of what I call my slow burn career, this is my fourth novel, is that, I wrote my novels from, in many ways, a very innocent place. I had a devoted but narrow readership, and I just was comfortable with it. I wasn't really worried about I wasn't worried about other people because I didn't think other people were worried about me. So it wasn't that I was so brave that I was just, I'm going to tell my truth regardless. That wasn't really on the table like that. Like I have some of the foreign editions here. Like look at this. I don't even know what country this is.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I never was sitting around thinking about what do people in this country, whatever it might be, think about my work. You know, like I wasn't worried about it because I didn't know it was a thing. It has been interesting how all the different countries, I feel like with the covers, you can see what they think is important. See, this is like a man and a woman.
Oh, wow.
And then
that's beautiful, actually. I can't quite see it. What's that one from which country?
This was originally the Italian cover. It's a woman holding a flower and she's got paint on her hands, but this was originally it was originally Italian, but I think this is the Polish version of the Italian. And this is my favorite, the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a country where it has been probably the most successful.
Really?
But I love this one. And this one, she's reading a letter. So some of them use the letters, some of them use the tree. And all of these, I always let the other countries make the cover however they want, because I feel that they know what their people like. Like it doesn't make sense for me to impose my American sensibility on the Korean cover.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to see what the different countries think is a representation of this story.
What do you think is reaching the world stage about this story? Why do you think it's resonating for so many different cultures?
Well, one thing is I think the question of women's roles changing in marriage is significant because, I mean, Celestial and Roy, yes, this is wrongful conviction. Yes, this is institutional racism, but it is also how much of a woman's life does she dedicate to nurturing her husband, which is a question that people are asking all over the world because things are changing. So that's part of it. I think also, though, people are extremely interested in American racism. I think that as a Black American writer, my other books were not translated. And because I think there wasn't enough racism in them. People feel like this isn't like Silver Sparrow. They felt like this is a story about.
That's a great one. By the way, Silver Sparrow.
It's my favorite, but I think there was a thought of, why do these sisters need to be Black? Like, they didn't seem to be having enough racial problems. Because they're 17 and their problems are each other. But I think that people look to Black American art overseas, just like, tell us how bad it is, tell us. And so I've always felt early in my career, I felt like you are not going to make me into a sociologist. I have stories in my life that are meaningful to me, and they're not about racism, but they're meaningful. And I reserve the right to write about a domestic story. Like, no one tells Jonathan Franzen he should put more racism in his stories. He can write about, a couple having emotions, and it's fine. But I think this one, because of the incarceration piece, gave it kind of an educational bent that I think people expect of Black authors.
There's also this educational piece in there. Like, my husband is Mexican, and he has a doctorate, and his brother has is a biogeneticist, and that was his world. And he said, but looking at the books and movies, when he was growing up, it was all like, gang members and this and that. And, he's like, where are my people on screen or in books? And that's something
where are his people on screen in books, where the fact that he's a person of color with an advanced degree isn't seen like the biggest conflict in the world? Because that is a narrative that you see. It's like, I'm a Black person, yet I've been to college and now I can't relate to anyone, which is also, it's just not true. I mean, people of color have a lot more class diversity in their families than other groups, because the civil rights gains made in recent times have caused certain people within one family to have this huge leap in status, like in one generation.
Yeah.
Or if you have let's say you have 10 kids in a family, like of my father's generation, if you have 10 kids in a family, the early kids, by the time civil rights movement happened, their moment to go to school or college or whatever had passed. But the younger kids They were born right at the right time to take advantage, which means within one family, you're having people with very different experiences. My oldest sister, I was born in 1970 in Atlanta. My oldest sister was born in 1960 in Louisiana. That means my older sister was born in the Jim Crow South. She's my sister.
Wow. Wow. So there's a couple of questions are coming in from Facebook. So Sharon has asked, does Tayari ever feel like she needs to be representational as a Black woman writer?
I'm really lucky that there are so many Black women writers out there that everyone can do different stuff. I mean, I don't think I could have written An American Marriage had, for example, Michelle Alexander already not done the new Jim Crow and laid down the facts. So I didn't have to feel like the facts aren't out there. I got to put more facts in my story. I do feel obligated to tell what I believe is the truth as I understand it as a Black woman writer. And I don't know if that is representational exactly, but I am aware that I have opinions and takes on things that may be different than someone who is not of my same demographic. And I try to stay true to that.
Here's another question. I love Tayari's mention of spirit. I wonder if she experiences spirit as multiple voices coming through, okay, I'll read it again. I love Tayari's mention of spirit. I wonder if she experiences spirit as multiple voices coming through as the characters, or more of a download of knowledge and information about the book she is crafting.
For me, it's more what the characters do and say. I sometimes feel almost though I'm observing them, like I'm recording what comes through me. Like, it's mysterious. I often say, well, I often think, I don't often say this because one of the challenges of being a woman writer is that you're always kind of trying to make sure you seem sufficiently intellectual and legitimate. And when you start talking about spirit or whatever, but it's a lot like romance. Like, if someone were to ask you what makes your relationship work, you can say, well, we get along, we both do this, we do that. But the experience of the romance is beyond you, really. It's something magical about the execution of that romance. And that's kind of how spirit feels, like the magic. Because, I mean, if you think about a novel, like when before I came on, you were reading the summary of An American Marriage. And I was thinking, books sure sound dry when you describe them. Like, if you think about Beloved, one of my favorite books.
Dry to you?
I mean, if you think about, but you didn't write that. I know that copy. It's not your fault.
That to me, it sounds good.
But like, okay, you think about Beloved. It's a story of a woman who kills her baby because she doesn't want the baby to be returned to slavery. The baby comes back from the dead and tries to steal her man. That sounds insane. That sounds like Fatal Attraction meets Roots. It doesn't sound like the greatest work of American literature that we have, but it is because of the spirit, because of the magic of the execution.
So what do you say to people who are afraid to maybe go there? Like, I think when people
where?
Into spirit, I've noticed that when people connect to that thing they're afraid of, that magic, that spiritual place, that's when the book goes from like good to something else. But I also noticed there's a lot of fear around that.
We can't help that. They have to get over that themselves. You can't help them with that. Like, that has to be something. And when they're ready, they will get past it. I do have a couple friends who are writing, and every time I read their work, I can tell they haven't tapped into the thing they can't control. That's what it really is. It's about control. They want to control the book. They want to make sure the book goes where they want the book to go. And you have to just let the book, you have to be willing to like almost like play with it. It's hard to explain this spirit thing. You can't really say exactly what it is, but it's about letting go of control. And it's probably, I always tell people, some things are a writerly problem, some things are a personal problem. That's a personal problem. We can't writing coach them out of it. They're probably controlling like that in the rest of their life too.
That is a revelation to me about control. My husband's a poet. Sometimes he'll write something and then he'll say, I wonder who wrote that. It's just gone through him from some other place, and he is allowing it to. So I think you're right about control, of just releasing it and seeing where it goes.
But you just have to be that. You have to be like that in your life. You're not going to be like that on the page and be very rigid in your life too. I can tell when I'm around people from their personalities. I'm like, I bet they can't release that on the page.
It's scary, I think.
It's not scary. Well, I guess if you're not like that, it's not really scary. The page, this is one thing I will say, the page is a safe space. Writing and publishing are two different things. There are things you may write that you don't choose to publish, but if you censor yourself when you're writing for fear of what's going to happen when it's published, then the censor is not a sophisticated thing. It's like a strainer you use in your kitchen. It can't tell the difference between good things and bad things. So a lot of good ideas will get also held back. So what I recommend to people is write whatever you want, and then you can edit it for fear of what other people will think if you want to do that. But just write it freely. No one will know. It's just between you and the page.
One of the things that I thought was so fresh about these characters was that I wonder, they felt so real that I didn't know what they were going to do. And I wondered if they didn't know. So you didn't know either what they were going to do. Is that how you
writing a book feels a lot like reading a book too. Like, I don't know. I keep turning pages also so I can know what's going to happen. And sometimes I'm disappointed or sometimes something will happen and that's not what I would have wanted to happen, but I can see how it makes sense. I'm like, yeah, that's what they would do.
So do you think because you're such a voracious reader that story structure or just the way to shape a narrative is sort of within you?
I don't know. I think that most of us know how to shape stories. It's just that when we start writing them, we start thinking we can't. For example, you tell a story to someone definitely 3 or 4 times a week. Like when you talk about what happened this weekend, you'll say, oh my goodness, this is what happened this weekend. I went to the mall and then I saw Mike. Oh, let me back up. Do you remember when I told you last year that I did such and such and I met this guy named Mike? Remember him? Okay, that's who I saw in the mall. You naturally know how to tell a story. You naturally knew how to go to that flashback. But when you start writing, you think, how do I know when to go into a flashback? You just have to learn to trust the way you tell stories.
Someone else is wondering, you have a full-time job, and do you have a writing ritual? Anisha's wondering, how do you carve time out to write with the full-time job? And is there any sort of ritual that you have?
One, a lot of people think they can't write. People can't be writers because they don't have time to write every day. Because, people say a writer writes every day. That is not, I don't know anybody that writes every day. I know people claim to write every day. It's like going to the gym. You're supposed to go to the gym 4 times a week, but if you get 2 times a week in, you're doing pretty good. I feel the same way with the writing and the full-time job, all the things I do, elder care, all the things I do. I have learned that these things are not the enemies of my writing. These things enhance my writing because they make my life full and rich. And the same is true for everyone else. All the busy things you do. I don't want to write a book by someone who sits at home all day writing books. I want to write a book by someone who I want to read a book by someone who lives in the world. I want to read the insight of someone who has done many things, someone who is busy, someone who's engaging with the world. When the writing isn't going well, I have rituals because it helps. It's just like in a relationship. You have date night when you need date night. When you don't need date night, every night is date night, right? And so with the writing, I try to write early in the morning. It's just better for me. I don't have to say no to other people because no one is up that time to bother me. And the day is fresh. I'm full of optimism. And I like to make sure I spend an hour and a half. I clean my desk before I go to bed so that when I wake up, the process has already started. It's like when you lay your gym clothes out, there's a much greater chance that you'll actually get to the gym. So I try to get as much going as possible. And I just try for that. I try for an hour. So 30 minutes, I'm allowed to noodle around and do whatever. And I set my timer. And at the end of the hour, what I have is what I have. I can't control the number of pages I write, but I can control how long I spend trying. And if you think about it, if you write a page a day or 5 pages a week, you will have a book at the end of the year. You'll have a draft at the end of the year.
There's a couple of questions have come in about how you write dialogue. Do you have any thoughts on that? Well, one is asking, it doesn't turn into stereotypical. The characters are not coming out as stereotypical. And do you have any tips on crafting dialogue like that?
I read it out loud. And if I can't hear someone saying it, then it's not working as dialogue. Also, I also take a lot of it out. The people probably end up saying about 75% of what I write. That's another thing, keep it short. When you keep it a little shorter, it ends up feeling more authentic because you just have fewer places where you could have dropped the ball.
And how do you feel about cutting? Do you, is it easy for you? Is it hard?
It's easy.
It's easy. Was it always easy?
Well, also it's not going anywhere. You cut it. It's not like you can't get it back. You know what I mean? It's fine. You just cut it, and see how it feels. And then if you decide you want to add it back, you still have it. That's the thing about being a writer. You still have what you had. So you aren't risking anything.
You have such a bold way of just owning your process that is really refreshing, honestly. Hi, Miss Jennifer. Is our time up?
You can tell that she's a professor.
Yeah.
Well, it's true. And my parents are professors also. So there you go.
But also, just
I want to take all your classes.
You know, saying you can't. Sometimes you just can't. You know, just there's a. I feel refreshed. I feel like I've gone through a pool, and I'm like, oh, this is a whole new way of thinking about it. I like this.
I want to go out and write. I'm like, I'll see you guys later. I'm going to go write.
Yes, go write.
Totally inspired. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was
wonderful.
Very inspirational.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Thank you.
I loved how direct you are. I mean, just take charge. And I absolutely love the idea of a date night for writing because, you know, just the idea of like approaching it that way. When you're in a place where you need it, then you have a ritual in place.
Yeah. And then once the writing goes good, like if the writing is working well for me, I could write on a napkin, I could write on my arm, but it's when I'm trying to get the fire lit, then I do all these rituals to get it going.
Yeah.
Do we have time? She has a Judy story that I wanted her to tell, although she is coming back later. Should we tell the story later?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's a long story. So it's not a long story.
Okay, let's tell it later.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes about 7 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, we'll do it next time.
Stay tuned.
I want to bring in our sponsor so we can thank them. I mean, our sponsors of this keynote event and thank them. And Tayari, you are just wonderful. Tayari, I said your name right?
And also later we get to give Tayari an award.
Yes.
Oh, you want me to go downstairs and get it?
At 4:15, we'll be
at 4:15. We'll give you the award.
You want me to hold it up though?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah, at 4:15. Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
our virtual giving it to you.
Be wonderful. Hello, thank you to our sponsors. Thank you, Tayari. That was absolutely wonderful. We just can't thank you enough for bringing your light to the San Diego Writers Festival and our storytelling community.
Thank you, Tayari. It was beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for believing in the arts.
Yes.